Welcome. My name is Clark Korb. I'm a holistic health practitioner, and today I will be discussing the practice of letting go. That is, recognizing when you are holding on to something which does not serve you. This may be done with a blend of consciously or unconsciously doing so. And some recommendations to help you let go with greater ease and ultimately feeling more peace, lightness, and joy. So before we talk about letting go of something, we must first address a little bit about what we hang on to. And I'm going to divide these into three separate categories or types. One being support, then attachment, and control. So first, looking at support, there are very good reasons why we need physical support. For example, when a toddler is first learning to walk, they have to hold on to their parents' hands for balance and stability. And then as that child grows, they continue to be dependent on the parents' support until they form into a more independent adult and can go on and begin their own life. Physical support can also have its place in being familiar in your environment or location. There's also emotional support from community, relationships, confidants in our life. There's the financial support of having a job, a career, or maybe an arrangement with another person that's providing financial support for us. And then there's the realm of attachment, which implies a stronger bond between oneself and another person, maybe another thing, or even an ideology. This attachment usually has a greater sense of emotional bonding or affection or love or fondness or sympathy. It can also include a strong association with the ego, where one defines their own worth as being a function of their title, they're attached to their possessions, their job, or more specifically, how they are perceived by others. It can also include being attached to an outcome, which leads us to the third aspect of control. There are certainly healthy aspects of control, such as self-regulation, being disciplined with regard to diet, exercise, budgeting, investing, those kinds of things. Also, when navigating a vehicle in the real world, that's very important to be in control. So regarding each of these realms of support, attachment, and control, there are times where each of these elements can serve us very well, and also times where it can be beneficial, if not absolutely necessary, to let go, despite the difficulty of doing so. How this can show up in the realm of support may be in the fear of loss, of familiarity or of comfort, or of a perception of stability. In the physical realm, this shows up when anytime there's a conflict with our own survival instincts, or maybe there's a fear of navigating the physical world or fear of meeting our own basic needs. An example of this is skiing. I remember when I was learning how to ski in college, there was a desire I had to lean into the hill thinking that, that will keep me grounded and on my feet instead of falling, forward over myself, over my skis, and being out of control. Similarly, with riding a motorcycle, if a novice rider sometimes might have too tight of a grip on the handlebars and be trying to micromanage the bike. Financially, this can show up as either losing a job through firing or layoff, or fear of leaving a job or a relationship that you rely on for financial support if it's a toxic environment. Certainly in industry, this is referred to golden handcuffs, where there may be stock options or some other benefits vesting in the future that keeps an employee sticking around, even if they're suffering through doing so, what can be over a tenure of many long and difficult years. Emotionally, the loss of support can show up in the form of grief. This is something that we all have to deal with, and certainly isn't anything that's under our control, where we have the loss of a loved one, whether it's the result of death or divorce or separations or breakups. Another way that a loss of emotional support can show up in a relationship is in the presence of an existing relationship which is ongoing or unhealthy, whether it's codependent, toxic, abusive, neglectful, some form of that. Now moving on to that second component, attachment. Attachment in this form can really arise from an unhealthy or excessive reliance on support. A great question to ponder in this light is, when does support become a crutch? I think it's a wonderful analogy in the sense where physically a crutch is necessary at some point during rehabilitation or healing. But once you're stable, if you continue to use the crutch when it's not necessary, it will hinder freedom to move and also freedom to become stronger. In the emotional corollary to this, it can take the form of a limiting belief that's established around one's own ability to sustain or generate a healthy self-reliance. So, using the analogy of the crutch, why would someone stay in or keep using the crutch of a dysfunctional relationship or job, staying in a toxic environment? And often this boils down to some level of denial, at least partially, where there are both some aspects of wanted and some aspects of what is not wanted. And a person may either not have consciously examined these, or they might even feel some level of shame at recognizing an unhealthy dependency that's there. And then the third aspect beyond attachment is the desire to control. Ultimately, this comes from an ego dominance, that really a false association that having our ego will keep us safe or keep us happy. And many times this shows up in the form of having in a vain attempt to feel better about something by manipulating others' behavior. This creates undue frustration for the non-compliance of others, not complying to your desired actions for them. Another sneaky way the ego can rear its ugly head here is to try to control other people's perceptions, and most commonly needing to be right. And ultimately, we can never convince anyone else of what to believe. They have to decide that on their own. And this desire to be right or to be validated often comes from a place of insecurity. So now that we've talked about several ways we're having too tight a grip on support or attachment or control can get in our way or limit us, let's talk about how to let go or loosen the grip a little bit and enjoy the benefits of that ease. So first, let's go back to support in the physical example. In the skiing analogy that I made, what I ultimately learned was that leaning downhill actually provides more control over edging. It goes against that survival instinct, but that survival instinct was incorrect without understanding the mechanics and the physics behind skiing. Similar to riding a motorcycle, if you have too tight a grip on the handlebars, it's actually much more difficult to direct the bike on its desired path. You let go of micromanaging the bike's response and letting the suspension do the job for you of handling the little road defects. And all it requires is a little simple press on the outside of the handlebars to lean it. Motorcyclists know what I'm talking about. But that analogy, I think, is so powerful that we can apply to the rest of our lives. So for grieving, this is an example in the emotional support realm. Certainly in the case of losing a loved one, for someone that's deceased, we know consciously there's no way we can bring them back. And this is hard for any of us that have lost loved ones. What we can do, however, is consciously reframe the belief we have about that person and our connection to them. I believe it's very much within our realm to look for signs of connection or messaging to people despite missing their physical presence. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but with time and with practice, and especially leaning into the appreciation for the gift or gifts that that person brought to your life. Ultimately, I believe this is where we find that closure that many of us look for at the end of a relationship, whether someone passed away or whether it's the result of a breakup or divorce or whatnot. No one else can really give you that closure. You can only get that for yourself. And I personally believe you obtain that closure only when you've given gratitude and appreciation for the gifts that that person brought into your life. So moving on to the unhealthy form of attachment. So attachment in this sense is ultimately stemming from an excessive reliance on support. And behind this, there's often an unresolved internal conflict where there's maybe a failure to acknowledge both sides of what does serve you and what does not serve you at the same time. A good analogy I've heard for this is a lukewarm bathtub, where it starts off warm, it's supportive and nice, and then over time it becomes stale and the bubbles are gone and the water's kind of cloudy, and it's not super comfortable to leave, and it's also not super comfortable to stay in. And in fact, inertia favors staying in, where it's easier not to make the change, even if it would be a net positive result. We always make an assessment of value in a relative manner. Value is really the relationship of benefit to cost. In recognizing this, we have an increase of value either when the benefit from something is increased or the cost is decreased. And I believe it's important in this case where there's an unhealthy attachment to make a more accurate assessment for both variables. For example, in a toxic job or a toxic relationship, it's very easy to complain about it, the cost of it. You might be unhappy with someone's behavior in a relationship or the environment at work. But it's also important to acknowledge the benefit. What payoff do you have for staying? Because if there weren't a benefit or payoff, you wouldn't be staying. And without doing so, it's easy to stay stuck or almost confused by this unconscious gain that keeps you there. And all you end up doing is just complaining about why you should leave. On the flip side of this, it might be easy to recognize the costs, i.e. what would inhibit you from making a change. Like, gosh, I'd have to find a new job or a new house or a new partner. But the costs might be much less than you think of making these changes. For example, if you are thinking about starting your own business and you think, gosh, I don't want to leave a stable job because of my health benefits, my health insurance, for example, you may be unaware of how easy it is to recoup that, especially with tax advantages being self-employed. The other component is the opportunity cost of staying might be much greater than what you're missing out and moving your talents elsewhere to another job, another employer, that kind of thing. I would refer to the past video I did on reclaiming your power of this, where you're more consciously making choices based on your own values and desires. All right, so the last aspect of letting go of control, the egoic need to control. Really, this requires a conscious decision to release the need to desire or control others. When you recognize that all you can control are your own responses, your own thoughts, and your own actions, you release the contingencies on your happiness being dependent on another person's behavior. And that is enormously liberating. And if you still want to be able to provide some help in coaching or mentoring other people, recognize that that's a very different energy than managing or micromanaging. Think of the motorcycle countersteering example. You're just pressing a little bit on the handlebars and giving up the micromanaging piece. So ultimately, letting go with more ease benefits you in just feeling lighter. You're unburdened from carrying undue psychic weight. The loved ones around you feel off the hook from no longer needing to perform to your standards or control. And it also allows you a much more productive and conscious use of your resources, your thoughts, your emotion, your energy, your time. And a lot of this, I believe, allows us even more of the practice to developing trust and being supported in healthy ways. Wayne Dyer used to speak of letting go and letting God. I know he didn't define that concept, but really I see that as leaning into abundance, allowing for more universal support and abundance to show up in unexpected ways. That there are new job opportunities, new income sources, new opportunities for a partner or a match if you're in an unhealthy or stuck relationship, or the ability to discover that you have new strength and new resilience. You may find you have an undiscovered ability to chart your own course that wasn't really manifest before. And as you lean into more abundant thinking, you can recognize that there are opportunities for anything to serve you if you get out of the way of allowing it. What about this resonates with you? Let me know in the comments below. If you found some value in what I've discussed today, I'd appreciate you giving this video a like and clicking on the subscribe button with the notification set to all in order to avoid missing future posts. Also, if you know of anyone who may benefit from what I've shared, please forward this video to them. These small actions take only moments to do, they don't cost anything, and they really help support the growth of the channel. Thank you for tuning in.